I'm responsible for production within the workshop, which is of gathering the heather, which is then brought into the workshop, dried for several weeks. It is then cleaned in a shot blasting machine, cut into lengths, and then put into a pressure chamber where it's dyed. It's then dried out again for a week or so, and then it's made into blocks using a hydraulic press. It's mixed with glue, fed into a press, and then compressed with about 4,500 pounds per square inch pressure. Once that's completed, it's put into an oven and baked at 90 degrees for 3 hours. We then leave it overnight and take it out in the morning when it's dry, and it comes out as a solid wooden block of various colours. From there, we then saw it into pieces using a circular saw, and we either use it on the lathe, cutting it into lengths, or we use it on the computerised engraving machine, making cabs actually to fit the fittings, the jewellery pieces. Recently we've had 4 or 5 local people going out to collect it, and we're gathering something in the region of sort of 14, 15 bags of heather per day, probably about 10 actual heather blocks.
We make all sorts of jewellery, pendants, bracelets, brooches,
key rings, earrings, bangles, necklaces,
pill boxes, bookmarkers.
I work in both parts of the process, sanding and shaping, and then lacquering to finish them off and setting them in the fittings that we use.
Once the pieces are sanded, we bring them through to the lacquering room, and that's where we pin them with temporary pins first, and then hold them with closed pegs so that they stay sturdy. Usually we give them about 5 to 6 coats of lacquer, depending on the item, whether it's a double-sided item or whether or not it's just a cap that goes into a brooch or a pendant or a bangle. And then once they're ready, we glue them into the fittings. Once the fittings are scored and marked, we use epoxy resin, that's a 2-part glue, and then they set for about 12 hours, and then we take them through to the shop where they box them and put them on display.